These are trick chairs, so we'll try not to fall off.
Moving low.
Yeah, exactly. I feel very relaxed. Okay, so some history for those who might not know. This is the 10th anniversary of Mint.com, the company you founded, launching at TC40, which is a predecessor to the TechCrunch Disrupt and the Battlefields like the one we're at right now. So it's 10 years almost to the month-ish, right?
It's exactly 10 years since I've been on a TechCrunch stage, presenting just like everyone else was, pitching, being nervous about all of that, doing the demo, live demo, and then eventually getting an enormous check.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
And it was, so talk a little bit about that experience. So did you come on knowing, hey, this is it, we're ready for this, or how ready were you for that stage at that point?
Okay, so when I pitched at TechCrunch for Mint, I had practiced my speech between 60 and 80 times. And we were doing a live demo of Mint, which was it's a personal finance tool. It connects all of your bank accounts, mortgages, student loans, everything all together in one place, categorizes your spending. And I actually put in my own personal financial accounts. I put my credit card, my bank account, my E-Trade.
Live on stage.
Live on stage. In fact, I fat-fingered my password, and so I only got one account through. But the transactions were live coming in, and I was so nervous even after practicing 60 or 80 times. But it was real. It wasn't a perfect demo. It wasn't one of these slideware or a video or anything like that. It was the actual production software that we had just gotten working like the night before. And it was amazing. People, you could see screens light up. People were signing up as I was speaking. We actually crashed the servers. We got 50,000 people to sign up that day, and it was taking 8 hours for them to download their transactions. It was terrible, but it was a good problem to have.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, we like to do things raw. We're like a reel on stage. So your Mint will launch at TC40, and then roughly 2 years later, it was acquired by Intuit?
It was 2 years to the day, and at that TechCrunch event, we announced that we were acquired for $172 million by Intuit. And it was an amazing rocket ship. This was the first, I think, $100 million plus exit after the financial crisis in the U.S.
Sort of signs of sunlight, sort of for the industry. A lot of people took it that way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I know you took some heat at the time for maybe it being a little too early. Do you feel comfortable about the time and timing of the acquisition still to this day?
If you look up my name in the Urban Dictionary, there is an entry called "Pulling a Patzer," which says "selling your hot company too soon." So yeah, I took a lot of flack for it, and arguably, we could have sold the company for $500 or $600 million a couple years later. But there is nothing wrong with putting a win on the board. Probably 10 of the first employees made over $1 million each, and there were 8 companies that came out of 35 people after that. And that's one of the things that I don't see happen in Australia and New Zealand. There just aren't enough exits, and so I'm not sure anybody values the equity because they haven't seen friends or friends of friends really make real money off of startups.
And that, the environment where acquisitions happen and there's money returned to the ecosystem, do you think that's hindered by like tax laws, or could there be some changes in New Zealand law that helps that scenario? Yeah,
it's hindered by 2 things. So one of them is until recently it was quite difficult to set up proper stock options in a way that wasn't taxed when you gave them to people. And by the way, I hope this doesn't happen in the U.S. because they're proposing taxing options in RSUs.
I hear like late breaking news, they just took it out. So there's plenty of other terrible stuff in that tax code, but at least that's out.
But as a result, you had to do complicated things where you would give people options and then you would give them a bonus each year that exactly covered their tax amount. And it was complicated and it was difficult, and as a result, a lot of people didn't do it. And then the other thing is cultural, at least in New Zealand, which is where I'm from now. If you have an exit, you buy a batch, that's a beach house, a BMW, and a boat, the 3 Bs. It's like the equivalent of the American dream or something of a picket fence. and you retire,
Uh-huh.
and you don't put money back into the ecosystem. So you should be angel investing. You should be starting another company.
Right. Got it. So after you had this Mint exit, you founded Fountain.
Yes.
The company that has very heavy machine learning and AI,
Yes.
and you that was a little different experience, right, from Mint?
Yeah, so Mint, we won TechCrunch. Everything went well, like incredibly well. The financial crisis hit, and my friends were telling me that their companies were tanking, and I was like, we just 4x'd because of the financial crisis. It was
Right.
exactly the right time when people needed to manage their money, and so the timing couldn't have been better. With Fountain, things were much harder. So Fountain, the idea was you could type in any question. It would figure out who the best expert in the world was to answer that question. You connect to them over video chat and screen sharing in about 90 seconds. So we had a lot of questions for medical, legal, veterinary, and even home improvement sort of questions. And we had tens of thousands of users. So it was going all right, but it would never broke into that hundreds of thousands or millions of paying users. And so decided to sell the company. But there's a difference between someone coming at you
Right.
and actively
Checkbook
asking.
in hand.
That's
Yeah.
right, because when you're doing well, people will come out of the woodwork and they'll say, so they might lowball you, but there'll be interest. Or
Right.
they'll be like, they'll just say, are you open to acquisition? Here, nobody was saying that. So we actually had to actively go out and sell ourselves. And if we hadn't built the technology as well as we did, that was the asset that was actually valuable. The
Yeah.
users were not.
Yeah, yeah.
The users and revenue were.
You didn't
were not
have
significant
traction
enough.
as that crowbar to say like, hey, look, you should buy it because there are these people here. It had to all rest on the technology stack.
Yeah, it was all the tech.
Yeah.
And so, $172 million exit, $9 million exit.
Right, right. And with those explain the difference in those conversations. Obviously, the Mint ones happen very rapidly, but when you go out to sell Fountain, are you looking for people that understood the value of the technology, like very technically adept investors, or people who had a history of involving in tech stacks, or how did you go about?
Yeah, you want to go
selling
after
that?
people who are the VP of product or the VP of engineering to understand the tech and the artificial intelligence, the natural language processing that was built in there. One of the things that we had done at Fountain was we produced a graph of how all human skills were interconnected, and we did this effectively by scraping the web for resumes and looking to see if somebody says, I'm a JavaScript engineer, and they list that they've done React or Angular or something, it knows that those two terms are correlated. And so we would develop a correlation between different human skills. And so that was valuable, a valuable taxonomy and a unique data set that no one had ever sort of come up with before.
So you sold Fountain. You moved to New Zealand,
Yeah.
right? And then what did you do? Did you move and take some time off?
I walked the length of New Zealand, so I walked for about 5
Like
or
on
6
foot?
months on foot, human-powered the whole way from the tip of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island. It was,
I think they made a movie out of this.
Yeah,
I think maybe.
yeah. I was in a desert.
Yeah,
lost a toenail. something
Right,
like that.
right.
Yeah. So it was 3,000 kilometers, and it was fantastic. I got to live in the mountains and get completely away. It was like my tech cleanse.
Like a detox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, except that I was listening to audiobooks on artificial intelligence
Right.
while I was in the wilderness.
Right, as you do.
As
know.
you do. Yeah.
Okay, so you were done with that. You had closed that chapter, and then you started Vital, which is the company that you're currently building.
That's right. Started that. The company was officially formed in January, but I've been working on it for about a year.
Okay. And explain a little bit, just the basic premise.
Yeah, so Vital makes software for emergency rooms. And it uses a lot of machine learning, natural language processing. It turns out when you go into the emergency room, people ask you the same sort of 10 questions. Why are you here? How did this happen? How long has it been happening? Has this ever happened before? Have you had any surgeries around this? And we can predict with about 90% accuracy whether you'll be admitted to the hospital or whether you will be treated and released, and about the kinds of things that you'll need. Will you need an X-ray? Will you need this type of lab test or another type of lab test? And we can make those suggestions or recommendations even before you see a doctor, just by asking you a couple of questions, either through a mobile check-in or a chatbot or even text message. It could be quite easily adapted to that.
And so for people that don't know, I mean, ER traffic control is like an enormous problem. You know, by the time you get to talk to a nurse or talk to somebody, you know, that brief interaction determines then where they put, what lane they put you in, right?
Yeah, basically they'll ask you, why are you here? You have less than 10 seconds. They'll say, you're not dying, go wait for 4 or 5 hours. And then that's it. You have no idea what's going on, or no recourse, basically. It's a terrible experience. There's 140 million ER visits in the US every year, so it's about 40% of the population, excluding, you know, the people who repeat. And it's about the same in most of the developed world. And so there's literally, you know, tens of millions or hundreds of millions of users in consumer terms that that you can get with this software. So it's a big addressable market. And there are not a lot of startups in healthcare because it's tough, because of the regulations, because it's such a closed thing from a data perspective. And it's also just, it's full of trash software.
Yeah.
Ugly, ugly software. It looks like late 90s software. It looks like late 90s Microsoft software, specifically.
Well, if anybody in the room was built for Microsoft in the late 90s, we're sorry. But the buzzwords of the decade so far are probably AI, machine learning, or ML. Yes. Those can mean, as most people know, a variety of different things, from really true hardcore interesting technology to we clicked a button on Amazon, right? You know, and like, how are you applying that in your company? But I am curious about the application of data sets within AI and ML. So obviously Vital is ingesting data and making decisions based on that and using machine learning algorithms to help make those decisions. But I'm curious whether you think there's room for smaller companies in niche or non-niche applications when the giants of the world have such large data sets. Because there's a sort of common thing, like, hey, the more data you have, the better you're going to be at this era.
Absolutely. And this is a constant topic of conversation. A lot of people think that the big companies have it locked up when it comes to AI, and they literally are paying engineers millions of dollars in salary each year. They get the best people, the best researchers. You will not beat them head on in image classification and speech recognition and search and all of those topics. You need to find your niche area, which for us is emergency medicine, and you need to find a proprietary data set, or you need to create a proprietary data set. So at Fountain, that was scraping the web for all of the resumes that we could possibly find and developing the graph of how skills were interrelated. At Vital, we found that actually the government had put out, through the National Health Ambulatory Medicine Survey, very obscure, very kind of difficult to find, data set, 30,000 anonymized records each year. And
like ER ingest?
On ER ingest. Yeah. When did the person come in? What day of the week? Turns out day of the week is actually way more predictive than gender, race, ethnicity.
Is it like a Saturday, Sunday night party thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And as well as the drugs that were administered, the reason for visit, what they were ultimately diagnosed with, everything that you could ever want in your machine learning algorithm. And then you don't need to understand the deep math or be scared of machine learning. There are so many off-the-shelf tools for this. We use a combination of Google's Word2Vec for certain things. We use deep learning for J, which is a deep learning neural net library, but you could use TensorFlow or any of the other libraries out there. And then straight up just logistic regression or support vector machines do incredibly well on many tasks. The most important thing is to get the data and to cleanse it and to do the machine learning on it.
Right. And do you think those strategic applications of AI and ML, what do you think the most, let's put medical aside. Right? Let's assume you've already said, hey, this is a ripe area. What other ripe areas are there for people to do that? Sort of slide under the umbrella and nail some problem spots.
So there's a lot in finance and recommendations that you could be doing. There's a lot of fintech companies that I see here. And I've really only seen AI sort of applied to portfolio optimization, but I don't even consider that really much artificial intelligence. There's sort of a portfolio theory that came out in the 70s and 80s about how you optimize for risk and beta and all of those things. There's a lot of AI around credit and loan decisions, but I haven't seen a lot of AI being used for user interfaces, whether in finance or elsewhere, to determine what you present and when. I actually think that in the future, we will see that interfaces, which today are these hard-coded, monolithic, everyone gets the same interface, maybe the content is recommended to you, but actually showing, depending upon what you know about the person. Are they young or old? Do they use the app frequently or infrequently? How do they use the application? That you actually progressively reveal or hide certain things.
Right.
From a UI perspective, I think that UI itself, which is almost a static framework, can be fluid and can be optimized using machine learning.
Yeah, so you would adjust affordances down for an expert user or up for an amateur user.
Yeah, it would be like if your car could change from an automatic for the basic user to a manual for somebody who you determined was an aggressive and fantastic driver.
Like me. Okay, so my wife would disagree, but that's another story. So that customization thing is largely based on context, right? So that you have a context about the user, how expert the user is at using the app. But we're also seeing some interesting advancements in just contextual computing based on identification and that thing too. So it seems like that would be a component of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for the past 8 years, we've been talking about a mobile-first mindset. And you really want to get into an AI-first mindset, which means that from an engineering perspective, you should really never be ever programming rules into your application. All rules and if statements and things like that should instead be determined by just a small machine learning algorithm. Sometimes just having a couple hundred data points in there is enough to get good signal out of it in a way that you wouldn't suspect.
Yeah, almost like a program synthesis philosophy, right? Like
That's
it
right.
writes itself on the fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you should be putting in, so machine learning is based on what are known as features. You have to vectorize everything from numeric data to categorical data to natural language into a vector. Basically, is it yes or no? Is it on or off? Is it present or not present? And so you want to create as many features as possible, and you should think creatively about what location are they coming from, what time of day are they coming from. All of those things can help your algorithms.
Let's shift gears just slightly. I want to talk about your investment strategy. So you've made some investments, some angel investments, obviously, since Mint days.
Yeah,
I'm curious, like, how do you pick those?
Yeah, I've invested in maybe a dozen or more companies, mostly out of Silicon Valley. I continue to take pitches every couple of weeks in New Zealand. I'd be open to Australia as well. I'm meeting a couple of companies here today and tomorrow. My investment strategy is always to go for utility. So I've never invested in anything that was social, mobile, ad network, or gaming. To me, that's too fickle. It doesn't add enough value to the world. And when you're talking about utility, it's either saving time or money or both. And to me, that's like real, objective, measurable, and that's what I go for.
Cool. And so what's give me an example of an investment that exhibits that you've made recently?
Oh, well, actually, I invested in a company called Carbon Health in the health space earlier this year. And Carbon is producing software for clinics. We're going after hospitals, they're going after clinics, and we decided we would sort of meet in the middle. So it's a bit of a different investment strategy where maybe there'll be a competitor 10 years from now,
right? And
then I'd have a piece of a competitor,
yeah.
Or maybe we'll acquire them, or maybe they'll acquire us, depending upon who does better. And so it just seems like it works in all possible
I think it's called a
directions.
spread bet in Vegas.
Oh,
terms. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you do it.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't think that there's a incredibly high-profile example of like an acquisition recently out of New Zealand in the health space. You think it's relatively nascent there?
Yeah, I mean, in New Zealand you have Orion Health, which is about 1,200 people, but I think they're spread a bit too thin. They're trying to go after the US and Europe as well as Australia and New Zealand, and their market cap is sort of sunk to couple $100 million in New Zealand, which is sort of less than Mint was acquired for with 35 people. So to me, it's not efficient from a capital and people perspective.
All right, one final question, a little dessert. So in terms of AI, obviously you've spent a lot of time, you have some patents in AI, if I know correctly?
Yeah, about 10 of them.
Yeah, so do you think Elon is right, that we should fear it? Or do you think somebody like Bill Gates is right, that we should be cautious of it but invest heavily?
I don't think that we should fear AI. Now, that said, I always put humans in the loop with my algorithms because, especially in medicine, 95 or 99% is not good enough. Same with self-driving cars. It's not quite good enough. And so there is always a human supervision aspect that I think is important, and also to prevent a lot of what you're seeing with the ad scandals at Facebook, Google, as well as what's happening with algorithmic YouTube videos.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the instinct to divorce humans from the algorithmic process, I think, is a knee-jerk one, and it's an easy one to make. Oh, let's back off. Let's get rid of the people. Maybe that'll make it simpler. But it seems like it's the wrong instinct.
It's great for scalability, and you should do that. But at some point, you should put some sort of human oversight in it.
Well, I'm all for it. All right. Thank you, sir, very much. That's all the time we have. Thank you all very much for listening. And now we are going right to break. So enjoy yourselves out there. Thank you.
Fantastic.